It did because yeah, I knew when I set out to write a novel, I wanted to do something in the Olympic world. I knew that, I mean, that's something that I know very well, and so it was an easy choice to do that. And then I was like, well, where are these Olympics going to be? And I didn't want it to be a piece of historical fiction. So I didn't want it to go backwards. I wanted to look forwards. And I've been fortunate to go to Doha, Qatar a few times for track and field meets, and I've kind of fell in love with the city's blend of this old Arabic town with its ancient supermarkets and temples, and then the glitz of everything that they've built, more modern, right next to it. And so, knowing, that, and knowing that how active Qatar is in bidding for future Olympics, I said that would be the perfect place for me to set this story. So, like, that's how those two things came about.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Living the Next Chapter, the author podcast. Get to meet great authors from around the world, talk about their journey. And if you love the Olympics at all, like me, then you're going to love our conversation today, because Joe is going to put the sports back in the Olympics for us here in the conversation. We're going to go through and compete. We're all going to end up with a gold medal by the end of this episode. So take your spot on the podium, and welcome Joe as well as he leads us. Joe, nice to have you here on the podcast. Welcome to Living Next Chapter.
Thanks. I appreciate you having me. Looking forward to talking.
Joe, tell everybody where you are. Where do you live in this big world of ours?
Yeah, I'm coming to you from College Station, Texas.
Ooh, Texas. Come on.
Yeah, big old Texas.
Okay, so College Station, for me, a Canadian, where roughly in Texas is College
We're
Station?
kind of in the heart of Texas. We're kind of smack in between Austin and Houston. We're like 90 minutes or so from either of those, about 3 hours south of Dallas. So easy to get to the metropolises from here.
Nice. Excellent. Good.
Yep.
Are you born and raised in Texas?
No, not at all. I born and raised in Newark, New Jersey.
There you go.
Yeah, I'm far away from home, right?
Yeah. Nice.
Yeah, I moved to Texas in 2014 for a job, and I met my wife in Austin, and she's originally from College Station, and we moved back here about 3 years ago.
So you have some roots there. That's good.
Yeah. Her family's still here, and we wanted to bring up our daughter Gigi here around family, so that's why we moved back.
Gigi, that's a nice name. I like that.
Yeah.
That's good. Awesome. Well, it's good to have you on the show. Joe, we got authors that listen to the podcast and their early days in their journey of writing, and they would love to have time with a published author like you to kind of ask their questions, get some insight, some inspiration for them as a new author. If you could have a few moments with a young author, a new author who's writing, what kind of things would have been helpful for you to hear back when you first started writing that we could share with that person listening right now?
Yeah, I mean, my background is started in newspapers, and I've always had that kind of creative writing bug from when I was a kid. My mom recently was cleaning out the attic and found this story that I wrote when I was like 10 or 11 about the mob infiltrating the Vatican, right? Like, what 11-year-old is thinking of stuff like that? But so I always had that bug, but I started working full time when I was 18 years old, and my parents were always begging me, like, you're such a good writer, like, write a book. And my pushback was always, I don't have the time. When am I going to do this? And a lot of that was true because, I was working some crazy hours at the newspaper, and after that, I started working for NBC Olympics, and kind of in the lead up to the Olympics, there's not a lot of time. And then after that, I started traveling a lot to cover track and field around the world, and so there's not a lot of time. But I guess if writing a book is really, really that important to you, it's figuring out the time, carving out the time, I think is the biggest thing. I didn't start writing books until I got laid off from my job, and finally, like, someone gave me all the time in the world to do it. Right. I think the biggest thing is time, because you need to be disciplined when you're going about it. You almost need to. I've heard all the crazy thoughts, and advice like sit down and write 3,000 words a day, or what some crazy word count number, right? Like, I don't buy into that, but I feel like if you're not writing something, one good thing, I don't care if it's a sentence, a paragraph, or whatever, the volume is. If you're not writing something good every day, like, it's never going to get there. So whether it's carving out an hour, a day, whatever it is, just try to find some bandwidth to get one good thing down. And you'll see that once you start laying those bricks into the foundation, like, it starts to come a little bit more after that. So
Yeah.
I guess that might be my biggest advice based on how things have gone for me.
Yeah. Any authors currently that you're really admiring their work as a reader?
I've always been a Stephen King fan.
Yeah.
And not necessarily just the all the titles that you've heard about, the Cujos and the It's, and all of those stories, but I read a book that he wrote called Fairy Tale that took me someplace that I was not even expecting, right? Like, it started out like there was, like, this teenager, and he's following this creepy guy in town, and, well, what no, you don't realize, and your mind starts thinking, okay, this is Stephen King. It's going to go down like some pretty warped avenue, right? Like, with this kid and this guy, right? And what it ends up taking you down is literally a fairy tale, like, into another world beneath this guy's house that was really like a fairy tale land, a kingdom with magical creatures and an evil dragon, and, like, I mean, like, all of this stuff, right? Like, that's very, not what you think of when you think of, Stephen King and the genre that he's sort of fostered and created. I think the man's a writing genius, and it doesn't matter whether it's a book or a collection of his short stories. Like, I'm always tapped in. I've got a playlist on my an audiobook of his short stories that I'm listening to right now as I go out fishing. I like to get up early in the morning on the weekends and get a pole and get a line in the water, and in that darkness and solitude, like, I hit play and just kind of
Nice.
I'm with myself, my thoughts, and Stephen King, hoping somebody doesn't come and knife me in the back while I'm not looking in the dark.
I had a fellow Stephen King reader who
Right.
sees that opportunity of some guy fishing and says, "I gotta take it." Yeah, no, okay, good, interesting. I like that. All right,
Yeah.
yeah. So I think that's interesting for the authors. I really want to encourage them. Like, I think a lot of times people start a project and then they get lost in the process and go, "I don't know what I'm doing." I don't know how authors get a book published in this world. It seems so daunting when you first start, right? So
and to me, it still seems that way. And I've just gotten the first one out, and I just marvel at what goes into it, and not just getting your initial idea down, but also the editing process and the rewrite process and the feedback process, and then where that takes you. And like, there's it's more than just getting it down on paper and slipping it to a publisher, and then, like, it goes into print, right?
Yeah.
Like, no, like, there's just so much more. And it's a wonder any books get out.
Right. Yeah, and you have multiple books as well, right?
I have two. Yeah,
Yeah.
I have a children's book and a novel.
Good. And the children's book came first?
The children's book came first. Yeah. That was my boredom project when I first got laid off from my job, and I was sitting here at my desk, looking at it. I got a picture of my daughter here next to me, and I was like, "What am I doing with with this time that I now have on my hands?" And as she was growing up, I always wished that like there was a track and field themed alphabet book for her. She, kind of, likes track herself because her dad does, and she knows that's what I've done for many, many years. And you kind of go on Amazon and look for track and field or books, and like there's none for kids, and you look for alphabet books, and there's alphabet books for every sport that you can possibly think of.
Right.
And there wasn't one for track, so I sat down and was like, well, what if I just approached it, I wrote all the letters down, and then I started, kind of coordinating those letters with the names of, some of the most famous athletes in the sport. And from there, I was like, okay, now I got this 26 list of athletes. How do I now write two sentences that sum up each of their careers and make it rhyme? And so that's how I kind of started there. And, I was able to get that done pretty quickly. And I went through a self-published process for that book, and even learned a lot of lessons in doing that, and discovering some of the things that work and don't work, and some of the things that I expected from the company that I was working with, and what they actually were willing to do, and what I thought they were going to do were two different things. And I had that in my head when I sat down to shortly thereafter start working on my novel Beneath the Rings. And I knew what I was going to do and what I wasn't going to do, and I wasn't going to self-publish. And I wanted at a minimum to find a hybrid publisher, or somebody that would be a little bit more collaborative than my self-published experience was.
Okay, so how do you end up at the Olympics? What are you doing there? Like, I'm so curious because, like, as a viewer and watching it on TV, you're like, okay, there's a lot of work going in behind the scenes to make all this happen. What was your role? Like, tell me more about this.
Well, I mean, it was some luck was certainly involved.
Yeah.
After about, I said I was working for the newspaper in New Jersey, the Newark Star Ledger, as primarily a high school sports reporter for 13 years. And I did a lot of great things there, and learned a lot of lessons there. But, at year 13 was kind of when the industry was struggling to monetize digital and figuring it out. Like, what is this, wide world of people getting things on the internet, going to mean for, publication. And I sensed that it was time for me to look for a change. And I was fortunate that my dad was a barber. And, if you're a good barber, you're talking to a lot of people.
Yeah.
And he had a contact that was working for NBC in the business development side of things. And, through that connection, I was able to get an interview with on the digital side with Dave Gobble, who's the coordinating producer of NBCOlympics.com, and Joe Jeshu, who's way up there on the NBC totem pole these days. And they hired me as an editor in June of 2007. So at that point, I wasn't scheduled to be on the Olympic team. I wasn't going to the Olympics. I was staying back in Stamford, Connecticut. But it was all new to me. And that fall was the Olympic Trials Marathon in New York City. They ran it the day before the New York City Marathon, so it was a Saturday. And during that race, an athlete named Ryan Shea had a cardiac event and died in the middle of the race. And that morning, I was the only person in the office. It was just me and a bunch of empty offices. And so I was the one that had to handle that breaking news and, all the stuff that was coming in from our broadcast team in New York, and, our Olympic researchers who were on the ground, and, really handled that to the best of my ability, which turned out to be pretty good because that night Dave Gobble called me into his office and said, we don't have a track and field producer for Beijing yet. Would you like that job? And I said, I didn't even think twice. I said yes because I knew that was my ticket to China.
Yeah.
I knew the only sports that were traveling were beach volleyball, gymnastics, swimming, and track and field. So
Wow.
I was like, okay, I'm going to China, and so that was my immersion, my first steps into track and field, and from there, you spend a lot of time researching the athletes and building written bios for the website of all the athletes that we think are going to make the Olympics based on who's competing well on World Cup circuits and international circuits and the World Championships the year before, and
Yeah.
building all that stuff up. Then you start covering the meets in the spring as they start happening, and building out more content. They have these like content car washes they call them, where they call it the NBC has a media summit, and then there's another later media summit where they bring in all the top American athletes, and they do. It's called a car wash because they literally run them from station to station. So there's a photo station and a video station and a research station and another interview station, and like all this, the multitudes of content that you see on TV
Yeah.
and in print, like come out of these media summits. And so you're collecting all that info and building out, mini features and Q&As, and you're going to events and doing interviews with athletes and turning that into stuff. And you go to the Olympic trials, and half of the bios that you wrote for the website get thrown out after the 10 days of the Olympic trials, and you got 70 new ones to write in the last 3 weeks before you get on the plane. And so
Yeah.
there's a lot of like groundwork that needs to be done, like leading up to the actual games. And then once you're there, then it's like, okay, now we're working with TV and, coordinating on, getting all of the best stuff up, within the allowed time brackets, because there's still a lot of embargoes. Things need to air on TV before they got posted to the web. I mean, there was a
Yeah.
lot of at least back then, there were more sensitivities than there are now. But there was a lot of that dance, and then coming up with recaps every day, and working with our columnists, and it's an enormous collaborative effort. The most collaborative thing I've ever been a part of in my life, and I've gotten to do it 4 times.
Wow.
And I don't. I wouldn't trade those experiences for anything.
So during the events that you're covering, where are you physically during the events? Are you like up in a
So for
room
track and
somewhere?
field, I was on the ground. I was
Really?
at the stadium.
Wow.
So I had a position like right behind where the broadcast team was. I had a desk, and I was able to like put an earpiece in and like listen to like all the stuff that our commentators were talking about, and transcribe some of that for the web. And I had a position in the the area where all the athletes get interviewed is called the mix zone, and so the athletes walk through this elaborate maze of interviewers, and the host broadcasters have the first positions, and then the written press has like another position like in the bowels of the stadium. And so I had a position working for NBC, fortunately, that I was out like in one of the early spots, so I had access to all those athletes coming through, and would be able to interview them. And one of the photos I have on my wall over here is of me doing a television interview for NBC affiliates with Oscar Pistorius, who was a
Yeah.
big name in the London Olympics, and was then incarcerated for murdering his fiancee.
Hmm.
So it's like kind of a weird juxtaposition of what you get to do sometimes.
Yeah. Wow. Okay, so all this becomes a huge like moment for you, several moments for you to live and experience. As this becomes a foundation for you for writing Beneath the Rings then?
It did
Yeah.
because I knew when I set out to write a novel, I wanted to do something in the Olympic world.
Yeah.
I knew that. I mean, that's something that I know very well, and so it was an easy choice to do that. And then I was like, well, where are these Olympics going to be? And I didn't want it to be a, piece of historical fiction. So I didn't want it to go backwards. I wanted to look forwards. And I've been fortunate to go to Doha, Qatar a few times for track and field meets. And I've kind of fell in love with the city's, blend of, this old Arabic, town with its ancient supermarkets and temples, and then the glitz of everything that they've built, more modern, right next to it. And so, knowing, that, and knowing that how active Qatar is in bidding for future Olympics, I said that would be the perfect place for me to set this story. So like that's how those two things came about.
Okay. For the readers that are listening, kind of this, to give us the story arc, a little bit about what we're going to find in the book. I want to make sure that people listening are like, oh, I love the Olympics and I love this kind of element of what you're writing. And I know someone else is also going to love this. So could you kind of give us an overview of the story there?
Yeah, I mean the book doesn't get into Olympic minutia, so
Yeah.
like I don't want
Yeah.
anybody to be scared off by that. But it starts with an Olympic journalist named Nova Mendelsohn, who's comes to the games to cover like the Olympics for like the 14th time in her career. So she's been there, done that. She's got a bit of a cynical eye of this, happening in Qatar, and all of the the issues that they've had with labor and human rights, and the things that built up the city for the World Cup. And she's soon thrust into what can only be described as a Munich 1972 type situation, where a terrorist group kidnaps the contingents from Israel and Lebanon and holds them hostage for an obscene ransom. And she somehow is pulled into this plot by this terrorist group. And, the ransom is delivered through her. And from there, she sets out to kind of solve the mystery of like, who is this group? Why are they doing this? And, how is she ultimately going to help save these athletes, and ultimately the Olympic movement, and perhaps the world, because their threat is quite sinister.
When you're crafting this main character, why do you have the certain elements you have for her, being cynical, for example, and kind of been there, done that? Why is that her kind of the way she operates?
Well, I think anybody that's covered the Olympic movement for any period of time is going to come away with some skepticism. It's highly political. Its motivations, while they seem altruistic or not, they're protecting a billion-dollar brand, literally a multi-billion-dollar brand. So I wanted her to have that kind of characteristic. I molded her actually after a good friend of mine, Alan Abrahamson, who was our Olympic columnist at NBC when I started. Alan's been to a lot of Olympics. He's covered the Olympic movement for the LA Times, and is now an independent Olympic journalist with his own website called Three Wire Sports. And that's where, Nova has her own website called Olymp Pulse.
Interesting.
So that kind of, so I kind of started there. I knew I wanted to create a strong female character, so I didn't, try to make Nova too much of Alan, but she's a good part of Alan, but she's also a blend of a lot of other female journalists that I admire. She's got some toughness and grit, and is a tough SOB like Lara Logan. She's got the investigative kind of powers of Nellie Bly and Ida Tarbell, and then some of that pioneering kind of women's sports journalists like Helene Elliott from the LA Times, and Leslie Visser as a broadcaster. So I would say she's a combination of all of those people and their characteristics.
Okay. So elements of the story as well. It's Sounds like there's a lot of like political intrigue here,
Yeah.
a lot of things happening behind the scenes, and kind of, the Olympics is kind of the backdrop, but there's a story happening here. So, what for you was kind of the guiding principles when you were writing the story? What were you trying to achieve in this book?
I wanted the biggest thing I wanted to achieve was Nova coming across as this incredible protagonist. I wanted her to I wanted her to shine throughout. I did not, this wasn't one of those where the bad guys were going to win,
Yeah,
So figuring out a way where, she stayed true to her core and came out on the other side with a win was important. I wanted to create at the same time a villain, and in this case, the villain is this terrorist group called the Obsidian Hand that had an air of mystery to them, but was also kind of rooted in the political conflict of the Middle East. So kind of tying some of their backstory back to some real life political strife in the area was important as well, and making it seem plausible for how these folks have become indoctrinated and then ultimately gone rogue to the extent that they have in pulling off something as audacious as kidnapping a dozen athletes from
yeah.
the Olympic Games, like right after the opening ceremony.
Now, from my perception as a viewer of the Olympics, it seems like a pretty safe and secure place. Like there's a lot of security. It seems like it's very well vetted. So the idea that that many people can go missing or be kidnapped seems a little bit hard to believe. Is just my reality or my view of it?
No, I think that's a fair view of it. I do think that going into every Olympics, there is this sense of what's going to happen here. I experienced a little bit of that going to Beijing, right?
Yeah,
I mean, there was a big worry, like, oh, right, we're going to bring all these, thousands of athletes and these millions of people into a communist nation,
yeah,
that are, adversarial to, particularly the United States. Like, what is this going to look like? And, ultimately security was super high and like nothing, really, awful happened. I mean, there were some things that happened, but, nothing that would derail the Olympics. And the same thing happened in Sochi in 2014 with everybody going to Russia, and suddenly like Russia's anti-LGBTQ policies, and how is that going to play in a Winter Olympics where there are a good number of LGBTQ athletes competing? Like, what is
right.
that going to, and are there going to be hostilities? And like, there weren't that. I mean, nothing that would derail the games. But as much as they've put in incredible security, and there's, I mean, you have to be well credentialed to get anywhere.
Yeah,
And there's security everywhere you look. There's still, I feel like going into a place like the Middle East, there's probably still going to be someone thinking back to 1972, right? And the Israeli athletes that were kidnapped and perished there. So I kind of wanted to make that root it back to that, and have this group sophisticated enough and with enough military type specialists and electronics gurus and security breachers and like all of that kind of stuff, to be able to infiltrate even the most modern of security.
yeah. Because not only is it a pretty secure place, all eyes are on the event as well. So you have the
Absolutely,
world
yeah.
watching. Right.
And I can say, like, I being on the ground at the Olympics, there wasn't a time that I felt like in jeopardy or did not feel safe. I mean, it might be I might have felt safer walking down the streets of Beijing than I do feeling walking down the streets of College Station, Texas. Like,
Hmm.
I mean, like, it was, I mean, and that even after the games, I mean, I traveled around, a bit in China after, and it was great. Like, I never felt, like I was in harm's way. And a credit to them for pulling that off. But I mean, some of it you got to, defy realism at some point, and
Yeah,
coming up with a fictional story. But I wanted to make it somewhat plausible.
interesting. Yeah, for your characters in the story to pull this off with the attention of the world as well. Like that might be something that might be a little bit easier if nobody's watching to pull this off, but when all of the cameras and all of the security and all the eyes, the attention of the world is watching the event, and you pull this off, that's pretty intense to be able to do
Yeah,
that.
it's pretty
Right?
intense, and I think Doha, part of that lent itself to pulling it off, and that a lot of people know a lot about Doha, Qatar, and like,
Yeah.
if there's a little bit of aura of mystery around the host city, then it becomes a little bit more plausible maybe to write some of the scenes that make that type of a kidnapping happen, and where they ultimately end up. But yeah, I mean, any way you slice it, it's a stretch. I mean, I'll be the first one to admit
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
You got to go there.
Yeah. So there's elements of historical aspects to the story without being historical fiction, but it's not really like future, right? It's more present day for anyone reading, right? It's
It's
kind of
set in
that
2040,
2040.
so
Okay. Okay.
it's not the not so distant future.
Yeah. Okay. All
I
right.
mean, we're on the eve of the 2028 Olympics,
Yeah.
so like before you know it, I mean, the 32 games are already awarded. I believe, I mean, they're already 1,000-day countdown to the Winter Olympics in Salt Lake City is already passed. I mean, like the 2040 Olympics are going to be here in a blink.
Right.
We don't yet know where they are. I mean, it would be a hoot if they're in Doha, but and I swear I have no insider information like
Wow.
on that, but yeah, I mean I didn't want it to be like so futuristic that like,
Yeah.
I mean, who would even know what an Olympic Games would look like, 100 years from now, right? Like I wanted it to be, you know, in the not so distant future.
How do you think the Olympics have changed over the years from like back in the day to where we are currently? Is it maturing? Is it getting more competitive? Like, is it getting better, worse? What are your personal opinion?
I think it's struggling right now to maintain a um a foothold and a relevance with a young audience. I think, those of us of a certain age, like, remember pulling up to the TV to watch the Olympics and like every minute of it, every time like it came on in the summer and winter, and that's not happening now. And we're in a digital age where people want their sports stuff immediate. So like that's forced some change in how the Olympics are broadcasted, but there are also some events that we that that don't resonate. And I think sports like modern pentathlon, for an example, right? Like, that's not resonating with a younger audience, and that's why I think you've seen some stuff happen like breakdancing, and
Yeah.
you've seen skateboarding, and
Yeah.
seen evolution in some of the the presentation of the winter sports. And um, I think if more of that doesn't happen, I fear that the Olympics are gonna struggle mightily in the future. I feel like there is also a group of people that just wonder why, and I think you're seeing this in the bidding process. Why are we spending all these hundreds of billions of dollars on venues for an event that's going to last 20 days and then leave us with these white elephant stadiums
Yeah.
and people don't want their taxes raised for the Olympic Games. And, I
Right.
think, you've seen that, in cities that have like been loudly rejected, Olympic bids, particularly in Europe. And Europe is, the Olympic movement's base, so if they're struggling to get on board, right? Like, what does that mean for,
Yeah.
other places, around the world? I think that's one of the reasons why you haven't seen a games yet on the African continent. You haven't seen them in the Middle East yet because, you know, those countries, are, what are they going to do with all of those venues, right?
Right.
Like after the fact, you're going to need sustainability, to pull off Olympics. I think that's why, right now, LA is the only place in America that makes sense for a Summer Olympics because the venues are there.
Yeah.
You don't need the construction anymore. You know, places like Salt Lake City make sense for the Winter Olympics because the venues are there. You don't
Yeah.
need to, you don't need to build them. I think, well, that's one of the advantages that a city like Doha has. In a future bidding, they have built a lot of sports venues already for, things like the World Cup and the Asian Games and stuff that they've hosted. So, not a lot needs to be done there, and they already have a lifetime and then some's worth of wealth from natural oil and gas, right?
Right.
Um, I think that's a factor. I really do. Like, where are the games of the future going to be held? And I think you're gonna see them popping up in places that have hosted games in the past, especially if they've got the venues present.
Does your book kind of touch on any of this stuff? Just think personal kind of little elements, new
No,
activities, new games within the game. Nothing. Okay.
no, no. And that was a conscious decision. I didn't really want to bog it down
Yeah.
with a lot of that, kind of Olympic. When I call it the Olympic minutia, that's what I
Yeah.
mean. I went into a good bit of detail, like crafting the opening ceremony of this Doha Olympics and what it looks like and the spectacle of what the opening ceremony is. And that was a deliberate choice. To you got Nova coming in skeptical, right? Like you've got like sometimes the glitz and glam of the opening ceremony can do a lot to tamp down someone's skepticism, right?
Yeah.
And she still kind of had a little bit of a skepticism after the end of those opening ceremonies, but even then it started to even she had to admit that it was unlike any opening ceremony that she had seen prior. And
Yeah.
but that's really the only thing that I kind of went into uh, super detail about. Other things I pick and choose, like setting scenes like in the main press center, just because that's where, a lot, the average person doesn't get to see that, behind the scenes where all the, the reporters from around the world are working, or with the International Broadcast Center, for the host broadcasters, and press conferences and going through security and some of those. I sprinkle some of those things in throughout the book, but like I didn't want to bog it down
Yeah.
and all it.
So going back to your like reporting on like high school sports and things back in the day, were there times where you're like, why am I even doing this? Like, why am I caring about this? Why am I writing these articles? Why am I watching some football team's game from the sidelines and like, why am I doing that? And now in hindsight, you're like, it all seems to fit together. That this all one led to the next, which puts you in the Olympics. Like,
Yeah,
is it pretty interesting?
there were moments I was wondering, like, what am I doing here?
Yeah.
I mean, and when am I going to be able to take that next step in my career?
Yeah.
For sure. I was fortunate enough when I was working for the Star Ledger. One of the beats that I had was high school volleyball,
Yeah.
and um, it wasn't a sport that a lot of people like paid attention to. Like it was not football, it was not basketball, it was not baseball, right? But that afforded me the opportunity to make an impact. I did a lot of impactful work with the coaches in the state and the New Jersey State Interscholastic Athletic Association to kind of revamp the state tournament. And I champion these causes in my writing to better the sport, and it brought change, and brought a fractured situation where there was a season playing in the spring opposite the traditional fall season, one brought all those teams together, and it sparked enormous growth in the sport. And when I started, there were maybe 120, 130 schools playing volleyball in the state, and now there's at least twice that, maybe three times that. I feel good about that. And, so that kind of helped with the, why am I doing this? There was a why there, right? For me, it was like, how can I help make this sport better? How can I bring more attention to the sport and the athletes and the stories, right, of those individuals? So I felt like I had a why in a lot of that. I was fortunate to cover a lot of girls sports. And so there was why there too, right? And elevating, the sports and accomplishments and struggles of female athletes that resonated with me. But it was largely a lot of honing craft. It was a lot of getting your million words of writing in, and doing it on deadlines. And we had 8-9 different sports sections on any given night, on a given Saturday. And so a lot of times you would cover an event and have to write 9 different versions of that event for each a different edition of the paper for geographically. So it forced you to come back with a lot of material when you were on the ground. Like you weren't coming back with one story, you were coming back with 9, so it was really, really instrumental in kind of building reporting chops, for sure.
Yeah. And I think that's a good point, because no matter what you're doing, you're still writing, and all of those things adding up over time, and then coming in and writing your own work. There's something there that influences you, or it just becomes the fact that you've written so much that becomes a kind of your foundation to do your own thing. So keep writing, basically, is what I'm hearing you say for authors.
Yeah,
right?
keep writing. Yeah. Don't stop writing. Yeah, I mean, and even when I started moving more into like a managerial role, and I was a VP of editorial of a track and field network in my last role, and and here I am, running a P&L and making business decisions and, editorial decisions. But I would always make sure that at some point in the year, I was doing something creative, right? To whether it was doing something written, bringing a long form project, into fruition. If I was going out to produce a video project, whatever it was, I didn't stray far from my creative roots. I made sure that I was continuing to do that, and for no other reason, so it wasn't a lose it and you use it or lose it kind of situation, right? I wanted to continue to hone those chops and keep them sharp and make sure that I wasn't losing it.
Excellent. Joe, tell us about your website for people who want to come follow. They want to get the children's book. They want to get Beneath the Rings. They want to follow you in the future as well for new projects coming down the road. Talk about your website before we head out the door here.
So my website is books by Battaglia, BATTAGLIA.com. It's got all the information on Beneath the Rings. It's got blogs with backstories of a bunch of the main characters. So if you want to get a taste of whether you're going to like that book, check those blogs out first. If you start getting into the book and want to learn more about the characters, check those blogs out. Well, nice. they'll take you there. The alphabet book is called The ABCs of Track and Field, and that's available on Amazon, and in all formats. So you can look for that there.
Good. And as we end off, Joe, how are you? Again, I'm using the name of my show. How are you living your next chapter? What's coming up?
It's a good question. Right now, I'm living this author's life, and doing a lot of publicity for Beneath the Rings. But it just came out on October 2nd, so I'm doing the podcast circuit, and so that's kind of new for me. But I've also started writing the outlines of what my next project could be.
Good.
I'm tiptoeing into it. I want to see like how things go with Beneath the Rings, and whether there's going to be demand for Beneath the Rings 2, or whatever we're going to call it. I did leave it as the story open to a sequel, with a happy ending. But if it, just in case it doesn't go there, but it's only kind of in the outline stage right now.
Okay. Well, I hope you get many gold medals for your writings. I hope that you release at least a book every 4 years. That would be good. That'd be in time with the Olympics, right? That would be good. And I hope that people listening will come and follow you and cheer you on from the stands as you continue to write. And we'll all be cheering you on as you cross that finish line, Joe. So thank you for being part of the podcast.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's been great, and I look forward to writing more. If I can get on that quadrennial like the Olympics, that would be awesome, like you said. But really appreciate the opportunity to talk a little bit about my journey, and hopefully I can help others on theirs.
Excellent. Everyone, all information for Joe in the show notes, as always. Go check out. He has his links as well to his LinkedIn, his Facebook, his X, Twitter, and Instagram as well through the website. Go follow him there. Make sure you connect with him. Let him know you're following. And when you get his books, not if, but when, make sure you leave a great review for Joe. I know he'd love to hear your thoughts on both books, and also reach out. I'm sure he'd love to hear from you as well. Joe, again, thank you so much for doing this.
Yep, you're welcome.
Hey, thank you so much again for pressing play. As you've heard, great guests on the show. And one thing you didn't hear in this conversation is what? What did you not hear? Think about it for a second. That's right. Not a single solitary commercial for a mattress or a supplement or a whatever you call it. No. Why? Because we don't want to break up the conversation with commercials. So the fact that you're still here means that you are a fan of the show, I'm assuming. So if you want to help to keep the podcast going and to make me feel really happy, all I really care about is coffee, okay? I just got to be honest. I love coffee. I'm drinking one right now. It's starting to get cold. I need to warm it up. Helping us with our Buy Me a Coffee link over at livingthenextchapter.com and also in the show notes helps kind of keep the lights on around here. Remember, I'm doing this for free. I'm paying for everything. So I would love to have a little coffee donation, even $5 kind of fills up my cup. And I would love to enjoy a coffee from you. So if you're interested, again, thank you for listening. But you can use our Buy Me a Coffee link and fill up the cup. Thanks for being here.